I want to start by telling you what I heard before I saw anything, because that's the part nobody believes. I heard the bells stop. You have to understand, on Valjean, the throne world of the Sovereign Concord, the bells never stopped. Not ever. Not in 9,000 years. There were 140 of them hung in the great spires of the Sky Temple, and they rang on a rotation so old and so precise that farmers on the outer moon set their planting by them. My grandmother told me that when she was a girl, her grandmother told her the same thing. The bells of Valjean do not stop. They rang through wars. They rang through plagues. They rang through the death of 3 sovereigns and the coronation of their heirs. And on the morning I'm telling you about, at the exact moment the human ships crossed into orbit, all 140 of them fell silent at once. Not gradually, all at once, like a hand had closed around the throat of the whole city. I was in the lower market when it happened. I sold ground spices and dried river fruit from a stall my family had run for 6 generations. It was a good spot, right where the Temple Road met the merchant quarter, and every morning I'd open before dawn and listen to the bells while I set out my baskets. That sound was the floor under my whole life. I'd never once thought about what it would mean for it to be gone. Then it was gone. And I stood there with a basket of dried fruit in my hands, and I looked up, and every other soul in that market had done the same thing. Hundreds of us, frozen, looking up at the spires, waiting for the bells to come back. They didn't come back. I should tell you about my world before I tell you what happened to it, because you can't understand the panic without understanding the pride. The Sovereign Concord was the oldest power in the known galaxy. Older than history, really. Our records went back 9,000 years, and even those spoke of an empire already ancient. We ruled from Valjean, and Valjean was not a planet so much as a work of art. The whole world had been terraformed and sculpted over millennia into something perfect. Floating gardens hung in the upper atmosphere. The seas had been shaped into patterns you could only see from orbit. The cities were carved from a pale golden stone that seemed to hold the light of the sun even after dark, so that at night the whole planet glowed soft and warm like a coal that would never go out. We were the center. That was simply understood. 112 species owed fealty to the Concord. Tribute flowed to Valjean from 1,000 worlds. Ambassadors came from every corner of the galaxy to kneel before the sovereign and beg for trade rights, for protection, for a scrap of the Concord's favor. That was the natural order. That was how it had always been. And the humans were nothing to us, less than nothing. I remember when we first heard about them. I was young then, still learning the family trade. A trader came through the market with news from the frontier. There was a new species out past the 4th verge, some backwater primates from a poison world, and they were trying to make contact. Everybody laughed. A poison world. Their homeworld's own atmosphere was slowly killing them. We heard full of corrosive oxygen, wild weather, oceans of undrinkable salt water. Their bodies broke down constantly and had to repair themselves just to survive the place that had made them. What kind of species evolves somewhere that's actively trying to kill it? Weeds, the trader called them. Galactic weeds. They grow anywhere in the worst dirt, and you can't kill them fast enough to matter. He meant it as an insult. We all laughed like it was one. None of us understood then that he'd said the most frightening thing anyone would ever say about the humans, and that he'd said it as a joke. For most of my life the humans stayed a rumor, a frontier curiosity. They spread, that was the one thing everyone agreed on, that they spread from their poison world to a few nearby systems, then a few more, but slowly, and far away. The Concord didn't concern itself with the frontier the way it once had. We were old. We were comfortable. The edges of the map were somebody else's problem. The Concord's attitude toward the humans in those years was the attitude of an old lord toward mice in his walls, occasionally annoying, never a threat, certainly not worth the effort of a real response. There was one incident I heard about years before the day of the bells that should have warned us, but we didn't listen. A Concord border governor, a proud old creature named Sethimas, had decided the humans in his sector were spreading too freely and needed to be reminded of their place. So he seized a human colony world, just took it, landed his troops, declared the colony Concord property, and demanded the humans there submit to Concord law or be removed. The humans on that colony had almost nothing, a few thousand settlers, farm equipment, some old mining ships, no war fleet, no orbital defenses, nothing that could stand against a Concord governor's forces. Governor Sethimas expected them to submit or to flee. That's what everyone did when the Concord came. You submitted or you ran. The humans did neither. I heard the story years later from a Concord soldier who'd been there, an old veteran who drank in the wine houses near my market and would tell it to anyone who'd listen, though his voice always shook when he did. The humans didn't have weapons that could fight the Concord ships, so they didn't try to fight the ships. They let the Concord land. They let the troops come down. They even seemed to submit at first, went along quietly, followed the orders, gave up their farms. And then over the following weeks, the Concord occupation force simply came apart. Not in battle. There were no battles. The humans didn't have the strength for battles. What they had was patience and cleverness and a bottomless refusal to actually give up while pretending they had. The water the troops drank started making them sick. The humans knew that world's biology, knew which local microbes the Concord physiology couldn't handle, and they knew exactly how to nudge things. The equipment started failing in ways that looked like accidents. Supply lines got tangled in bureaucracy that the humans, somehow, had learned to weaponize. Soldiers who wandered off alone didn't come back, and there was never any evidence of anything, ever, just an empty patrol route and a missing man. The nights on that world were long and dark, and the humans owned the dark. They'd evolved on a world that hunted them. They knew how to be the thing in the shadows that you never saw until it was too late. Governor Sethimas held that colony for 4 months. In 4 months, without a single open battle, he lost a third of his force to sickness, sabotage, accident, and the dark. His soldiers refused to sleep. They started shooting at shadows. 2 of his own officers had breakdowns. And the humans, the whole time, kept smiling and submitting and saying, "Yes, Governor, of course, Governor, whatever you say," while their world quietly ate his army alive. He withdrew. Publicly, he claimed the colony was strategically valueless, and he'd chosen to abandon it. Privately, that old veteran in the wine house told me, Sethimas never slept a full night again for the rest of his life. "They never fought us," the veteran said, his hands shaking around his cup. That's the thing that got into your head. They just waited and smiled and let their world do the killing. And every one of us knew by the end that we could no more win against them than we could win against the dark itself." He drank. "You can fight an army, boy. You can't fight the dark. The dark just waits." We should have listened to him, to all the stories. We didn't. We were too old and too proud and too used to being the center of everything. The Concord had ruled for 9,000 years. What was one bad frontier season against 9,000 years? So we forgot about the humans again, went back to our comfortable lives, went back to the bells. Until the morning the bells stopped. When the bells fell silent, I did what everyone in the market did. I stood frozen for a moment, and then I ran for the Temple Road, because from the top of the Temple Road you can see the sky over the harbor spires, and if something was wrong, that's where you'd see it. I wasn't the only one. Half the market ran with me. We poured up that road, hundreds of us, spice sellers and cloth merchants and water carriers, all our differences forgotten in the sudden shared terror of a silence that had never happened before. And when we reached the crest and we could see the sky, we saw them. I have tried to describe the human ships many times since. It's hard because they were nothing like our ships. Concord ships were beautiful. Everything the Concord built was beautiful. It was almost a law with us. Our warships were sleek and golden, carved with the same care as our temples, adorned with the sigils of the great houses, gleaming like jewelry against the black. When a conquered fleet passed overhead, it was a thing of glory. People cheered. Children pointed. Our ships were meant to be looked at, meant to inspire awe and love and pride. The human ships were not meant to be looked at. They were gray, a flat, dead, unlovely gray. No decoration, no sigils, no care for how they looked at all. They were built like tools, like hammers, like the blunt, heavy machines the humans used to tear metal out of dead worlds. There was nothing beautiful about them, nothing meant to inspire. They were purely, brutally functional, and that was what made them so terrible to look at, because a thing built with no thought for beauty is a thing built with only one purpose, and you did not want to think about what that purpose was. And there were so many of them. They filled the sky. Not a fleet. Fleets have edges, have shapes, have a front and a back. This was a wall, a gray wall across the whole upper sky, ship beyond ship, more than anyone could count, hanging over Valjean in absolute silence. That was the worst part, the silence. Our ships announced themselves, engines singing, comms broadcasting, the whole spectacle of a conquered arrival. The human ships said nothing. They just appeared, filling the sky, and they hung there, silent and gray and patient, and they waited. Waited for us to understand. The panic didn't start right away. That's the strange thing about real panic, it takes a moment. First, there's just disbelief. Hundreds of us stood on that road and stared up at the gray wall in the sky, and nobody screamed, nobody ran, because our minds simply couldn't fit what we were seeing. The humans, here, over Valjean itself, over the throne world, over the center of everything. It wasn't possible. The throne world had never been threatened, never in 9,000 years. There were defense grids, orbital fortresses, the whole home fleet, layers upon layers of protection built up over millennia. Nothing could reach Valjean. Nothing could get past the outer defenses undetected. It was the safest place in the galaxy. It was the definition of safe. And there was a wall of gray human ships hanging over it, and the bells had stopped, and slowly, terribly, our minds began to catch up with our eyes. The first scream came from somewhere behind me, a woman's voice, high and broken, and then it was like a dam breaking. The whole crowd came apart at once, people running in every direction, colliding, falling, trampling. A merchant's cart overturned, and I heard the crash of 100 clay jars. Somebody's child was crying, lost, and I couldn't see where. The panic went through the crowd like fire through dry grass, and within a minute the whole temple road was chaos. I didn't run, I don't know why. I think I was too stunned to run. I just stood there at the crest of the road, in the middle of the stampede, staring up at those silent gray ships, and I remember thinking one clear thought, cutting through all the terror. They got past everything, every defense we built in 9,000 years, and they didn't even fire a shot to do it. Because that was the thing, the defenses hadn't failed. There'd been no battle, no alarm, no warning at all. The human ships hadn't fought their way to Valjean. They'd simply arrived. I learned later how they did it, and it's almost worse than if they'd fought. They hadn't beaten our defenses. They'd made our defenses irrelevant. While the conquered spent 9,000 years building bigger walls and better guns, the humans had spent their few short centuries learning something else entirely. Learning how to move through the galaxy in ways we'd never imagined, folding space in methods our physicists insisted were impossible, arriving where they wished to arrive without ever crossing the space between. Our defenses watched the borders. The humans didn't come through the borders. They came through somewhere our science said didn't exist. The old veteran in the wine house had been right. You can't fight the dark. The dark just waits. And then when it's ready, it's simply there, and there was never any moment where you could have stopped it, because it never came from anywhere you were looking. The Sovereign's response in those first hours was exactly what 9,000 years of pride would tell you it would be. The home fleet scrambled. Every warship on Vol'jin and in the surrounding system rose to meet the humans, thousands of beautiful golden vessels, the pride of the conquered, the mightiest concentration of force in the galaxy. They formed up between the human wall and the planet, guns run out, sigils blazing, and it was, I'll admit, a magnificent sight. For a moment, seeing our own fleet rise, some of the panic in the crowd turned to hope. This was the conquered. This was the center of everything. Surely now the humans would see their mistake. Surely now they'd flee, the way everyone fled from the conquered's might. The conquered broadcast a demand across all frequencies, in the trade tongue, so that everyone, every soul on the planet, every human in those ships would hear it. The voice of the Sovereign's High Marshal, cold and proud and certain. Unidentified vessels, you are in the sovereign space of the conquered, above the throne world of Vol'jin. This is the gravest violation of conquered law in the history of the galaxy, and it will be answered with the full and final force of the home fleet. You will withdraw immediately, or you will be destroyed utterly, and your species will be made an example that echoes for 1,000 years. Withdraw or die. There is no third choice. You have 1 minute to comply. And the human ship said nothing. The minute passed. 60 seconds of the most complete silence I have ever heard, the whole planet holding its breath, the golden fleet facing the gray wall, and the humans saying nothing at all. The High Marshal, I imagine, took that silence as defiance, as the arrogance of a primitive species too foolish to understand its danger. He gave the order to fire. The home fleet of the Sovereign Concord, thousands of warships, the accumulated might of 9,000 years, opened fire on the human wall. I saw it from the Temple Road. The whole sky lit up, every color there is. The beautiful golden ships poured everything they had into the gray wall, a storm of light and fury that should have shattered anything in the galaxy. And the crowd around me, those who hadn't fled, actually cheered, a ragged, desperate cheer, because surely, this was the conquered reasserting the natural order. The light faded. The gray wall was still there. Not damaged, not scorched, not moved. Still there, silent, patient, exactly as before, as if we hadn't fired at all, as if the entire home fleet of the Sovereign Concord, the mightiest force in the galaxy, had thrown a tantrum and the humans had simply waited politely for it to end. The cheer died in the crowd's throat. I heard it die. Thousands of voices cheering, and then nothing. Silence again. The same silence as the bells. And then, for the first time, the humans spoke. It wasn't the High Marshal's cold, proud voice. It was something else. A human voice, and it came across every frequency at once, into every ear on the planet, calm and quiet and almost gentle. That was everything you had, the voice said. We understand. You had to try. 9,000 years of being the strongest thing in the galaxy, of course you had to try. If we were in your place, we'd have tried too. A pause, the whole planet listening. We're not going to fire back, the voice went on. We want to be very clear about that right now, before anyone does anything they can't take back. We did not come here to destroy your world. We came here to talk. And we understand that you can't hear us yet, not really, because you still believe, somewhere in the back of your mind, that there's a version of this where you win. So we're going to wait. We're going to sit right here, and we're not going to fire, and we're going to let you throw everything you have at us as many times as you need to, until you finally understand that there is no version of this where you win. And then, when you understand that, when you're ready to actually listen, we'll talk. We're patient. We can wait a very long time. Another pause. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere, and neither, we promise you, is anyone on your world going to be harmed. You have our word on that. Whatever you may have heard about us, whatever your governors told you after they ran from our colonies, we did not come here to hurt your people. We came here to change something. And when you understand what, you'll understand why we came in a wall instead of a whisper. Some things you can only say if you're impossible to ignore. The voice went quiet, and the gray wall waited. I want to tell you about the panic now, The real panic, because it wasn't what you'd think. You'd think the panic came from fear of death, from thinking the humans would destroy us. But it wasn't that. The human voice had said clearly twice that no one would be harmed, and somehow, I can't fully explain it, we believed it. That gentle, patient voice was more convincing than the High Marshal's threats had ever been. No, the panic wasn't fear of death. The panic was the ground falling out from under the whole galaxy. Because for 9,000 years, everything had rested on one fact. The Concord was the center, the Concord was the strongest, the Concord could not be challenged. Every treaty, every tribute, every kneeling ambassador, every child's understanding of how the universe was arranged, all of it rested on that one fact. And a wall of ugly gray ships had just erased that fact from existence in an afternoon. If the Concord could be reached, if the throne world itself, the safest place in the galaxy, could be surrounded by a silent gray wall that shrugged off the entire home fleet, then nothing anyone believed was true anymore. Every certainty was gone. Every hierarchy was smoke. The tribute worlds, the client species, the 112 species who owed us fealty, what would they do when they learned? What happens to an empire built entirely on the belief that it cannot be challenged, the moment everyone learns it can? That was the panic, not death, the end of the world as everyone understood it. The realization, all at once, across the whole crowded market, and the whole shining city and the whole 9,000-year empire, that the story we'd all been living inside was over, and none of us knew what story came next. The news spread faster than any ship could carry it. That's the thing about the Concord. It was built on communication, on the constant flow of information from the center to the edges and back. And now that network, built to project Concord power to every corner of the galaxy, carried the opposite message to every corner of the galaxy. Humans over Vol'jin, home fleet fired everything, no effect, the center has fallen. Within hours, I'm told, the panic had reached the nearest tribute worlds. Within a day, the middle territories. Within a week, the entire galaxy knew. And everywhere the news went, the same thing happened. The ground fell out from under everyone. Client species that had knelt for millennia suddenly wondered why. Tribute fleets en route to Vol'jin with their annual offerings stopped in space, their captains unsure whether they were still carrying tribute or something else now. Governors on distant worlds locked themselves in their palaces. Riots broke out on a dozen planets. On some worlds, statues of the sovereign came down. On others, they were guarded around the clock by soldiers who no longer knew what they were guarding or why. Panic spread across the stars. That's not poetry, that's just what happened. You could have drawn a map of it, the fear rippling outward from Vol'jin at the speed of light, world after world going dark with dread. And through it all, the gray wall hung silent over the throne world, not firing, not moving, not demanding, just waiting, patient as the dark, for the oldest empire in the galaxy to finish falling apart on its own, so that the humans could talk to whatever was left. I stood on the temple road until nightfall. Most people had fled home by then, to hide, to hold their families, to wait for an end that the humans had promised wouldn't come. But I stayed. I couldn't move. I looked up at that gray wall against the darkening sky, and I thought about the trader who'd called them weeds, galactic weeds. They grow anywhere, in the worst dirt, and you can't kill them fast enough to matter. He'd been right. He'd been so right, and he'd said it as a joke, and we'd all laughed. A species that evolved on a world trying to kill it. A species that learned to grow in the worst dirt, in poison and darkness and salt. A species you couldn't kill fast enough to matter, because that was the whole story of them, wasn't it, from the very beginning? Their own world had spent millions of years trying to kill them and failing. What chance did we have, we soft golden people who'd never once had to fight our own planet to survive? The Concord had spent 9,000 years learning to be the center of everything. The humans had spent their whole existence learning to survive when everything, including the ground under their feet, was trying to end them. And now they were here, over the throne world, and the bells had stopped. I found out later what happened next, what the humans wanted, and what they did, and the thing that occurred in the throne room itself that changed the galaxy forever. I even got to see some of it with my own eyes, though I didn't know yet that I would. But that first day, all I knew was this. I was a spice seller on the Temple Road, watching the center of everything come apart, and above me hung a wall of patient gray ships crewed by a species we'd called weeds. And for the first time in my life, and the first time in 9,000 years, the bells of Valjean were silent. That silence is the loudest thing I have ever heard. And what broke it in the end was not a weapon. For 3 days, nothing happened. That's what people forget when they tell this story now. They tell it like the humans arrived and marched into the throne room and everything changed in an afternoon. It wasn't like that. For 3 whole days, the gray wall just hung there over Valjean, silent, patient, not firing, not demanding, not moving. And the whole planet lived under it. And slowly, hour by hour, we learned what it's like to live under something that could end you at any moment and simply chooses not to. It changes a person. I can tell you that. 3 days of that changes something in you that never fully changes back. The first day was panic. The second day was a strange, exhausted numbness. The panic couldn't sustain itself, and it burned down into a kind of gray waiting, everyone just sitting in their homes, glancing at the sky, waiting for something to happen. And the third day, something unexpected started to grow. Curiosity. Because the humans kept their word. Nobody was harmed. Not one soul. The gray wall didn't fire, didn't send down troops, didn't do anything at all except wait. And when a thing that could destroy you spends 3 days deliberately not destroying you, you start, despite yourself, to wonder about it. To wonder who they are. To wonder what they actually want. By the third day, people were back in the market. Fewer of us and quieter, but back. I opened my stall. What else was I going to do? The dried fruit doesn't keep forever, and a person has to eat, and life, it turns out, insists on continuing even under a wall of gray ships. Customers came. We talked in low voices, glancing up at the sky, but we talked. And the thing we talked about more and more was not fear. It was that gentle, patient voice. We came here to talk. No one will be harmed. We're patient. We can wait. What if, an old cloth merchant said to me quietly on the third day, buying river fruit he probably didn't need just for an excuse to talk. What if they're telling the truth? What if they really did just come to talk? About what? I asked. He looked up at the gray wall and he was quiet for a while. I don't know, he said, but in 90 years of life I never once heard the Sovereign say no one will be harmed. Not once. And here's a stranger who could kill us all, saying it twice in one afternoon. He picked up his fruit. Makes you think, doesn't it, about which of them is really the monster. He shouldn't have said that. Not out loud. A year before, saying something like that about the Sovereign would have gotten you disappeared. But that's what 3 days under the gray wall did. It made people say the things they'd never dared say. Because the thing that had made them afraid to say those things, the absolute unquestionable supremacy of the Concord, was hanging in shreds in the sky above us, and everyone knew it. On the fourth day, the humans finally moved. Not the whole wall. One ship. A single gray vessel detached itself from the wall and descended toward the planet, slow and deliberate, and every eye on Valjean followed it down. It came toward the capital, toward the Sky Temple and the Sovereign's palace at the heart of the city. And it landed, not stormed, not crashed, landed, gently, precisely, in the Grand Concourse, the great ceremonial plaza before the palace where tribute processions had marched for 9,000 years. I was there. I'll tell you how because it matters. When the ship began its descent, I did something I still don't fully understand. I left my stall, just left it, baskets out, coin box unlocked, everything, and I walked toward the palace, toward the descending ship, toward the thing everyone else was running away from. I wasn't brave. I want to be clear about that. I've never been brave. I was a spice seller. But there was something pulling at me, some need to see, to understand, to look the thing in the face instead of hiding from it. And I wasn't the only one. As I walked toward the Grand Concourse, I found others walking with me. Not many. A few dozen out of a city of millions, but a few dozen ordinary people, all drawn by the same strange pull, all walking toward the ship instead of away from it. We reached the edge of the Grand Concourse just as the ship touched down. The Concord's palace guard was there in force, of course, hundreds of them in their golden ceremonial armor, weapons ready, forming a ring around the landed ship. And behind them, on the palace steps, stood the high officials of the Concord, and I could see even from a distance that they were terrified, all their 9,000-year dignity cracking, because the thing they'd spent 3 days pretending wasn't real had just landed on their doorstep. And then the ship opened, and the humans came out. There were 7 of them. 7 against the whole Concord, against the palace guard, against the home fleet, against 9,000 years of empire. 7 humans walked out of that gray ship into the Grand Concourse. They didn't look like conquerors. I keep coming back to that because it's the thing that undid all of us. They didn't look like conquerors at all. They wore plain clothes. Not armor, not uniforms, plain, simple, practical clothes, the kind of thing you'd wear to do work. There were males and females among them of different ages. One of them was old, genuinely old, gray-haired, walking with the careful steps of the elderly. One was young, barely more than a youth. They walked out into the plaza calmly, unhurried, and they looked around at the golden splendor of Valjean with an expression I can only call interested, curious, like tourists, like people seeing something beautiful for the first time and appreciating it. And in the center of them walked a woman. Not the oldest, not the youngest, middle-aged, with dark skin and gray beginning at her temples and lines around her eyes that spoke of someone who'd spent a lot of years squinting at hard problems. She wore the same plain clothes as the others. She carried no weapon that I could see. And she walked at the center of the 7, the way the sun sits at the center of a system, not because she demanded it, but because everything else naturally arranged itself around her. She was the one who'd spoken. I knew it before she said a word. I don't know how. You just knew, looking at her, that the gentle, patient voice that had hung over the whole planet for 3 days had come from her. The palace guard leveled their weapons at the 7 humans. Hundreds of golden soldiers, hundreds of weapons, all trained on 7 unarmed people who just walked out of a ship. The woman stopped. She looked at the wall of leveled weapons, and she raised her hands slowly, palms out, not in surrender exactly, but in the universal gesture of I mean no harm, and she smiled. A small, tired, kind smile. Please, she said, and her voice carried across the whole plaza, calm and clear. There's no need for that. We're not armed. We're not here to fight. If we wanted to fight, we wouldn't have sent 7 people to walk into the middle of your capital, would we? We'd have sent the wall. She lowered her hands slowly. I'm here to speak with your sovereign. That's all. To have a conversation. 9,000 years of history, and I don't think anyone from my world has ever actually sat down and talked with anyone from yours. Not really. I'd like to change that. Will you take me to your sovereign? The captain of the palace guard, a huge armored figure, a warrior of one of the great houses, stepped forward. His voice shook with rage and fear in equal measure. You dare, he said. You dare walk into the Grand Concourse, 7 of you, and demand audience with the sovereign after threatening the throne world itself. You will be taken into custody, all of you, and you will answer for. Captain, the woman said gently, and something in the way she said it stopped him cold. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen because I don't want anyone to get hurt, least of all your people. If you try to take us into custody, my crew will not resist you. We won't fire a shot. We won't raise a hand. We'll go peacefully. But the moment you lay a hand on us, the wall over your world will know. And the wall has orders I gave, orders I can't rescind from down here, that if the 7 of us are harmed or taken, It is to assume the conquered has chosen war and respond accordingly. Not by destroying your world. We'd never do that. But by doing to your empire what your governor Sethimas tried to do to our colony and could not. By simply waiting in your sky forever until every tribute world sees that the conquered's own capital lives under our shadow and draws the obvious conclusion, and the whole thing comes apart on its own. She took a step forward, past the leveled weapons, and not one of the guards fired because not one of them dared. So here's the choice, Captain, she said, softer now. You can take 7 unarmed people into custody and start the unraveling of everything your people have built. Or you can take me to your sovereign and let me try to find a way through this that leaves your empire standing and your people safe. I would very much prefer the second one. I think you would too. I think you're a soldier who's spent his whole life protecting your people, and I think you can see, if you look, that taking us prisoner protects no one at all. She met his eyes. Take me to your sovereign, Captain, please. Let's find the way that keeps everyone alive. The captain stood frozen. I could see the war happening inside him, 9,000 years of duty, and pride against the plain, terrible sense of what she was saying. His whole life had trained him to seize this threat, to protect the sovereign, to never, ever let an enemy walk freely into the palace. And yet she wasn't acting like an enemy. That was what broke him, I think. Enemies threatened. Enemies demanded. This woman kept saying please, kept saying I don't want anyone hurt, kept offering him a way to protect his people instead of endanger them. And every soldier's deepest instinct, under all the pride and duty, is to protect. She'd found that instinct, and she was speaking to it directly, past all the ceremony. If this is a trick, the captain said very low, if you harm the sovereign. I give you my word, the woman said, on the lives of my entire crew, on the lives of everyone on those ships above your world, that I will not harm your sovereign. I'm not here to harm anyone. I'm here to have a conversation 9,000 years overdue. That's all. That's all I've ever been here for. The captain looked at her a long moment more. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. And the hundreds of guards behind him, taking their cue from their captain, lowered theirs. Come with me, the captain said. All of you, I'll take you to the sovereign. And then, in a voice almost too quiet to hear, and whatever you are human, I hope for all our sakes you meant what you said. I did, she said simply. I always do. That's the one advantage of only ever telling the truth. You never have to remember what you claimed. Now here's where my part of the story turns, and where I got to see the thing I'll be telling people about until the day I die. As the captain led the 7 humans across the grand concourse toward the palace steps, the woman, the leader, paused. She'd noticed us. The little cluster of ordinary people who'd walked toward the ship instead of away, standing at the edge of the plaza, held back by a line of guards. She looked at us, this handful of spice sellers and cloth merchants and water carriers, and something in her face softened. She walked over to us. The captain protested, but she waved him off gently. She came right up to the line of guards, right up to us, and she looked at us, really looked, the way almost no one important had ever looked at people like us, and she said, "You walked toward the ship, didn't you, when everyone else ran?" Nobody answered. We were too afraid. "That took more courage than anything I've done today," she said. "I have a wall of ships behind me. You had nothing but your own 2 feet, and you walked toward the frightening thing anyway, because you wanted to understand it." She smiled. "That's the bravest thing there is, walking toward the thing you don't understand instead of away from it. My whole species is built on that, and I've rarely seen it done better than you all just did it." And then she did something that undid me completely. She looked right at me. I was near the front, and she said, What do you do? What's your trade?" I could barely speak. "Spices," I managed, "and dried fruit I sell in the market. My family has for 6 generations." 6 generations. She nodded slowly, like this was a genuinely important thing, worthy of respect. 6 generations of feeding your people, keeping them nourished day after day so they can live their lives. That's real work. That matters more than half of what happens in that palace. She glanced up at the golden building, then back at me. When I go in there, I'm going to be talking to your sovereign about the future, about what happens to your whole world, your whole empire. And I want to carry a real face in with me while I do it. Not an official, not a marshal, a person. Someone who actually lives here, actually works here, actually has something to lose. She held out her hand, that strange human gesture of greeting. Will you come with me? Stand in the throne room while I talk. So that when your sovereign and I decide the future, there's at least one ordinary soul in the room who has to live inside it. I want you to understand what she was asking. She was asking a spice seller, a nobody, a person who had never in his life been within a mile of the throne room, who had never so much as glimpsed the sovereign except as a distant figure at festivals, to walk into the heart of the palace and stand witness while the fate of the galaxy was decided. I looked at her hand, and I thought, this is madness. I can't, I'm nobody, they'll never allow it, I'll be killed just for daring. And then I thought about the old cloth merchant's words. Makes you think, doesn't it, about which of them is really the monster. And I thought about the bells and the gray wall and 3 days of a stranger who could kill us all, choosing, over and over, not to. And I thought, if the world is going to end, if everything is going to change, then I would rather see it happen than hide from it. I would rather walk toward the ship than away. I took her hand. Yes, I said, I'll come. Her grip was warm and firm and human. Good, she said. What's your name? I told her. I'm Adira, she said. Adira Sol. Ambassador, I suppose, though nobody gave me the title. I just started doing the job and it stuck. Stay close to me, stay calm, and no matter what happens in there, remember, nobody's going to hurt you. You have my word. Same as I gave the captain. Same as I gave your whole world. She smiled again. Come on then. Let's go see how 9,000 years of history handles meeting something it can't intimidate. And she pulled me under the line of guards, who were too stunned to stop her. And I, a spice seller from the lower market, walked with the humans into the palace of the sovereign. The inside of the palace was more beautiful than anything I'd ever imagined, and I barely saw it. I was too frightened, too overwhelmed, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Endless golden halls, guards at every doorway, officials scurrying, whispering, staring at the humans, staring at me, this impossible commoner walking in their midst. I kept my eyes on Adira's back, and I put one foot in front of the other, and I did not let myself think about what I was doing. And then we came to the great doors of the throne room, and they opened, and I saw the Sovereign of the Concord for the first time in my life, up close, seated on the throne that had ruled the galaxy for 9,000 years. The Sovereign was ancient, far older than I'd realized. The festival glimpses had never shown the truth. A withered figure small on the vast throne, draped in robes of gold and white, with skin like old parchment and eyes sunk deep in a face mapped with the lines of centuries. Conquered sovereigns lived enormously long lives, extended by every art our science possessed. This one had ruled for over 400 years. 400 years of absolute power. 400 years of being the center of everything, the unchallengeable heart of the galaxy. And now, at the end of all those centuries, an ugly gray wall hung over the sovereign's world, and a plainly dressed human woman walked into the throne room with a spice seller at her side. The High Marshal was there, the one whose cold voice had demanded the humans withdraw or die. He stood beside the throne, and his face was a mask of fury and humiliation. And ranged around the room were the great lords of the Concord, the heads of the ancient houses, the whole apparatus of 9,000 years of power, and every one of them stared at Adira Sol with the same expression. Disbelief that this was happening, that it could happen, that the center of everything could be forced to receive an uninvited stranger in its own throne room. Adira walked to the center of the throne room. She stopped before the throne, and she did not kneel. The gasp that went around that room, you'd have thought she'd struck the sovereign. Everyone knelt before the sovereign. Kings knelt. Admirals knelt. The heads of the great houses knelt. In 9,000 years, no one had ever stood before that throne without kneeling. Adira stood, and she inclined her head, a slight, respectful nod, the greeting of one leader to another, and she spoke gently into the ringing silence. "Sovereign," she said, "thank you for receiving me. I know this is not how you wanted this day to go. I know I've turned your whole world upside down. I'm sorry for that, truly. If there had been another way to make you actually listen, I'd have taken it. But your empire is very old and very proud, and it has spent 9,000 years never once having to listen to anyone. And what I have to say is too important to be waved away by an undersecretary and forgotten in a file. So I came in a way you couldn't ignore. I hung a wall over your world, and I'm sorry. But now that I have your attention, I'm going to use it to try to save your empire. Not destroy it. Save it, if you'll let me." The sovereign regarded her from the ancient throne with those deep-sunk eyes. And when the sovereign finally spoke, the voice was thin and dry as autumn leaves, but there was a mind behind it, sharp and cold and old beyond reckoning. "You stand before me," the sovereign said. "You do not kneel." "No," Adira agreed, "I don't. Not because I don't respect you. Because kneeling is a lie between us now, and I don't tell lies. We both know your fleet fired everything it had at my ships and did nothing. We both know your throne world lives under my shadow as we speak. If I knelt to you, we'd both know it was theater, the conquered pretending to submit to preserve the pride of the conqueror. And you've had 9,000 years of theater, sovereign. What you need now, I think, is one person in this entire galaxy who will simply stand in front of you and tell you the truth. So that's what I'm going to do, whether you like it or not." The High Marshal could contain himself no longer. "Sovereign," he burst out, "this is intolerable. A primitive, a human, stands unbowed before the throne dictating terms, and she has brought—" His eyes fell on me, and his lip curled with a contempt so total it took my breath away. "She has brought a gutter merchant into the sacred throne room. This is a calculated humiliation. We should—" "Yes," Adira said, cutting across him, and her voice for the first time had an edge. "I brought a gutter merchant. Let's talk about that actually, because it's exactly the thing you need to hear." She turned and she gestured to me, and every eye in that throne room, the sovereigns, the high marshals, the great lords, turned to a trembling spice seller who wanted nothing more than to sink through the golden floor and disappear. "This is a citizen of your empire," Adira said. "His family has fed your people for 6 generations. When my wall appeared over your world and everyone ran, he walked toward the frightening thing because he wanted to understand it. That's more courage than anyone in this room has shown today, including me. And your High Marshal just called him a gutter merchant, with contempt, in front of you, and none of you flinched. Because to you, to all of you, this brave, decent, hardworking soul who keeps your people fed is beneath your notice. A thing. A number, gutter. And that," she said, and now her voice rang through the whole throne room, no longer gentle, "is why your empire is dying. Not because of me, not because of my wall, I'm just the messenger. Your empire is dying because for 9,000 years you have looked at the people who actually hold it up, the farmers, the merchants, the workers, the soldiers who bleed for you, and you have seen gutter. You have taken and taken and taken from them and given back contempt. And a house built on the contempt of the people who hold up its walls does not fall because someone attacks it. It falls because, one day, the people holding up the walls simply decide to stop. And I am here to tell you, Sovereign, that day is very, very close. Not because of me, because of you, because of 9,000 years of gutter." The throne room was utterly silent. The High Marshal's face had gone gray. The great lord stared. And the ancient sovereign, on the throne that had ruled the galaxy for 90 centuries, looked at me, really looked, for the first time, at a spice seller shaking in the center of the sacred throne room. And something moved in those ancient eyes, something I can only call the beginning of understanding. But the understanding wasn't complete yet. And the High Marshal wasn't finished. And the most dangerous moment of that whole day, the moment when everything nearly went to blood and ash, was still to come. Because there were those in that throne room who would rather see the entire galaxy burn than admit that a human, and a gutter merchant, had spoken the truth. The High Marshal made his move, while everyone was still reeling from Adira's words. I didn't see it coming. I don't think anyone did, except maybe Adira. She always seemed to see everything coming. The High Marshal was a warrior of the greatest of the ancient houses, and he had built his entire life, his entire identity on the supremacy of the Concord. He was the sword of the throne world. His whole meaning came from serving an empire that could not be challenged, and in the space of a few days, a wall of gray ships and a plainly dressed human woman had taken that meaning away from him and left him with nothing but humiliation. His fleet had failed. His threats had been ignored. And now a human stood unbowed before his sovereign, calling the whole empire dying, and a gutter merchant stood witness to his shame. A man like that has two choices. He can face the truth and let it break him and try to become something new. Or he can decide the truth is intolerable and choose destruction over acceptance. The High Marshal chose destruction. He didn't have a weapon in the throne room. No one was permitted weapons in the throne room except the sovereign's personal guard. But he was a warrior, faster and stronger than any human, and he was standing close to the throne and close to Adira. He lunged for her. It happened in an instant. One moment he was standing rigid with fury, and the next he had crossed the space between them, his powerful clawed hand reaching for Adira's throat, and I understood in a flash of horror what he was doing. He wasn't just attacking her. He was trying to force the war. Because Adira had said it herself in the plaza, if the humans were harmed, the wall had orders to respond, to begin the unraveling. The High Marshal couldn't defeat the humans. So he would do the one thing that could still salvage his shattered worldview. He would make them the aggressors. He would force them to destroy the Concord, so that at least the Concord could die as the noble victim of human savagery, instead of dying of its own 9,000 years of rot. If he killed the human ambassador in the throne room, the war he wanted would begin. And in his broken mind, that was better than peace on human terms. Better a glorious end than a humbled survival. His hand reached Adira's throat. And the young human, the youth, barely more than a boy, who'd walked in with the seven, moved. I have never seen anything move so fast. Humans, I would learn, are not slow at all when they need not to be. That's another thing their poison world taught them, another thing we'd never understood. The young human crossed the space in less time than it took the High Marshal's claws to close, and he put himself between the Marshal and Adira, and he took the blow meant for her throat across his own body. The High Marshal's claws meant to tear out a human throat, raked across the young man's shoulder and chest instead. Human skin is soft. There was blood, a shocking amount of it, bright red against the golden floor. The young man staggered but did not fall. He got both hands on the High Marshal's arm, and he held on this soft, bleeding, unarmed youth, holding the arm of a conquered warrior of the greatest house. And he looked the Marshal in the eye, and through the pain, he said one word. No. Just that no, not a threat, not a curse, just a refusal, the most human word there is. No, you will not do this. No, I will not let you, no. And the other 5 humans were moving now, closing in, and the Sovereign's personal guard were moving too, and for one terrible heartbeat the whole throne room teetered on the edge of the abyss. One wrong move, one drop more of blood, and the wall above would begin its work and the galaxy would come apart. And into that heartbeat Adira Sol spoke, not loudly, but with a force that stopped every being in the room. Stop. Everyone stopped. Adira stepped forward past the bleeding youth, past the frozen guards, and she stood directly in front of the High Marshal, who still held his blood-slicked arm raised, who still had murder in his eyes, who could have killed her with a single blow. She stood in front of him, unarmed, unguarded, and she looked up at him. She was so much smaller than he was, and she said, quietly, so quietly that the whole silent room had to strain to hear. "You wanted me to give the order, didn't you? You wanted to make me the monster, kill the human, force the war, let the conquered die a martyr instead of admitting the truth." She shook her head slowly. "I know that hunger, Marshal. I do. When your whole world is falling apart and you can't stop it and the only thing left is your pride, I know how badly you want to burn it all down rather than watch it be taken from you. I've felt it. Every human has felt it. Our whole history is one long lesson in that exact hunger, and in choosing, over and over, not to feed it." The bleeding youth was on his knees now, held up by two of the other humans, red blood pooling beneath him. Adira glanced at him, and her voice cracked just slightly, but she didn't look away from the marshal. "You just hurt that boy," she said. "Badly, he may die. He put his own body between your claws and my throat, and he said no, because that's what we do. We put ourselves between the people we love and the things that would hurt them, and we say no, and we mean it with everything we are. And by every rule I laid down, by every order I gave the wall, his blood on this floor should be the end of your empire. Right now. This moment. I could say one word and the unraveling would begin and nothing would ever save the conquered." She stepped even closer to the marshal, close enough to touch. "But I'm not going to say that word," she said. "Do you understand me? I am not going to give you your war, because that boy did not bleed so that I could burn a galaxy. He bled so that I wouldn't have to. He took your blow so that peace would still be possible. And I will not spit on what he did by choosing slaughter. So here is what's going to happen, Marshal. You are going to lower your arm, you are going to step back, and you are going to live live. With the knowledge that a human boy you tried to make into the excuse for genocide instead saved your entire empire by bleeding on this floor and refusing to let you have your war. That's your punishment, not death, life. And the memory of what real strength looks like, which you saw today and which you will never, ever forget." The High Marshal stood frozen, his arms still raised, blood dripping from his claws onto the golden floor. And then slowly, something in his face collapsed. The fury drained out of it, and the pride, and what was left underneath was just an old warrior who had built his whole life on a thing that was gone, and who had just been shown, by an unarmed woman and a bleeding boy, that everything he understood about strength had been wrong. He lowered his arm, he stepped back, and then this proud warrior of the greatest ancient house, the sword of the throne world, he sank to his knees in front of Adira Sol, and he bowed his head and his massive shoulders shook. "I yield," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "I yield, forgive me. The boy, please save the boy." "We're already saving the boy," Adira said, gentler now. Two of the humans were working over the wounded youth, pressing cloth to the wounds, and I could see he was still breathing, still conscious, still impossibly trying to wave off the fuss, to say he was fine, that it was nothing, and the way I would learn was so completely human. "He's strong. They're all strong. That's the whole point, Marshal. That's what you never understood about us." She put a hand, a small human hand, on the kneeling warrior's shoulder. "We don't break. We bend, we bleed, we suffer, but we don't break. Your world was perfect and it made you brittle. Our world tried to kill us and it made us unbreakable. That's the only difference between us. That's the whole difference. And it's why we're here, and it's why you knelt, and it's why, if you'll let us, we can teach your people to be unbreakable too." The throne room was silent, the bleeding boy breathing, the marshal kneeling, and on the ancient throne the sovereign of the conquered watched it all with those deep, old, understanding eyes. And then the sovereign spoke. "You could have destroyed us," the sovereign said. "Not once, many times, when my fleet fired on your ships, when my marshals spilled your blood in my own throne room. By your own law, by your own orders, you had every right to end my empire. And each time you chose not to." The ancient head tilted. "Why, tell me truly, human? Why does a species we called weeds, a species from a poison world, a species we seized and mocked and dismissed for centuries, Why does it come to the throne of the empire that scorned it, holding every advantage and choose mercy at every turn? What is it that you want? Adira Sol was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the bleeding boy. She looked at the kneeling marshal. She looked at me, a spice seller, still standing there in the center of the throne room, shaking, witness to all of it. And then she looked up at the sovereign, and she gave the answer that changed the galaxy. "We don't want anything from you," she said. "That's the part your empire can't understand, because your empire is built entirely on wanting, on taking, on tribute, on making 112 species kneel and give. You look at us holding all this power and you assume we must want something, because that's all power has ever meant to you. Something to take. But we don't want your worlds. We have our own, and we can make more out of dirt you'd throw away. We don't want your tribute. We don't want you to kneel. We don't want you to serve us. We came all this way and hung our wall over your sky and endured your fire and bled on your floor for one reason only." She took a breath. "We came to tell you to stop. Stop taking," Adira said. "Stop grinding down the weak because you can. Stop looking at the people who hold up your empire and seeing gutter. Stop treating 112 species like tribute machines and your own citizens like numbers. Just stop. That's all. That's the whole demand, the only demand we've ever had. You want to know why we care? Why we crossed the galaxy to tell an empire that scorned us to be better? Because we were you once. On a much smaller scale long ago on our poison world we had empires too. We had kings who saw their own people as gutter. We had the strong grinding down the weak. And it nearly killed us. It nearly ended our whole species before we ever left our world. And what saved us, the only thing that saved us, was learning, the hard way, over rivers of our own blood, that strength used to grind down the weak is not strength at all. It's rot wearing strength's face. And it always, always, always collapses in the end. So when we came out into the galaxy, and we found the Concord, this ancient, beautiful, rotting thing, this empire that had spent 9,000 years perfecting the art of grinding down the weak, we recognized it. We recognized the disease because we'd nearly died of it ourselves, and we could have let it collapse on its own. It's going to, you know. It was always going to. An empire built on contempt for the people who hold it up is already dead. It just hasn't finished falling yet. But we didn't want to watch 112 species die in the collapse. We didn't want the wars, the famines, the chaos of an empire coming apart. So we came here to the center, to the throne, to you, to try to do the thing no one has ever been able to do to the Conquered. Make it stop. Make it change. Make it choose while there's still time to become something that deserves to survive. That's what we want, Sovereign. We want you to live, but we want you to live differently. We want you to take that ancient, beautiful empire and turn it from a machine that grinds people down into something that lifts people up. And we will help you. We'll share everything, our science, our medicine, the arts that let us grow in poison and dark. We'll stand beside you while your tribute worlds become partners and your gutter merchants become citizens who are seen. We'll do all of it gladly, for free, asking nothing back. But only if you stop, only if you choose to be better. That's the whole thing. That's why the bells stopped and the wall came and the boy bled on your floor. All of it, every bit of it, for one word. She looked up at the ancient sovereign. "Stop, will you?" The sovereign of the Conquered, 9,000 years of empire, 400 years on the throne, looked down at Adira Sol for a very long time. And then the sovereign wept. I did not know the sovereign could weep. I don't think anyone did. But those ancient sunken eyes filled and overflowed, and tears ran down that parchment face. And when the sovereign spoke, the dry autumn leaf voice was thick with something no one in that throne room had ever heard from it before. "For 400 years, the sovereign said, I have sat on this throne and I have known in the deepest part of myself, where I never let the light reach, that it was rotting, that we were rotting. I have watched the tribute come in and the contempt go out, and I have told myself it was the natural order, that it had always been so and always would be, that there was no other way for an empire to be. I have looked at my own people and seen gutter, and I have hated myself for it in the dark, in the parts of myself I never examined. And I have done nothing. For 400 years I have done nothing, because I did not believe it was possible to do anything else. And now a human from a poison world stands unbowed before my throne, holding my whole empire in her hand, and instead of taking it, she asks me to stop, to be better. She tells me it's possible. She tells me she'll help. She bleeds her own people on my floor to keep the peace, and she asks nothing, except that I become something that deserves to survive. The sovereign looked around the throne room at the great lords, at the kneeling marshal, at the bleeding boy, and finally last at me, a spice seller, a gutter merchant. And the sovereign held my eyes, and I did not look away, and something passed between us that I will never have the words for. I have seen more truth in this room today, the sovereign said, than in 400 years upon this throne, and I am so very tired of the rot. The ancient head bowed, toward Adira Sol. Yes, human, yes, we will stop. I will spend whatever years I have left tearing down what I spent 400 years upholding and building in its place something my people deserve. And I will do it with your help, and I will do it gladly, and I will thank the stars until my last breath that when the humans came to my throne world, they came not to conquer, but to heal. That's how it ended in the throne room, not with fire, not with conquest. With an ancient emperor weeping and choosing, at the very end of everything, to become better. The bells of Valjean rang again that evening, all 140 of them after 4 days of silence, and I have never heard a sound so beautiful in all my life because they didn't sound the same. I know that sounds impossible, but they did. The same bells, ringing the same rotation they'd rung for 9,000 years, but they sounded lighter, freer, as if they too had been carrying a weight all those centuries and had finally set it down. The boy lived, by the way, the young human who took the marshal's claws across his chest so that peace could survive. Adira's people saved him with medicines that astonished our physicians, and within weeks he was walking again, and he came down to the market once. I don't know how he found me, and he bought dried river fruit from my stall, and he smiled and said it was the best thing he'd tasted since leaving his poison world, and I could not speak for the lump in my throat. This boy who had bled to save my whole world, standing at my little stall, delighted by dried fruit. That's humans. That's the whole thing about them in one moment. They'll bleed to save a galaxy and then be genuinely, purely happy about a piece of fruit. The changes came slowly, the way real changes do. 9,000 years of rot doesn't come out in a day, but it came out. The sovereign meant every word. The tribute system was dismantled, world by world, and rebuilt as partnership. The great houses fought it, some of them. There was unrest, there were dark years, there were lords who'd rather burn than change, just like the marshal in the throne room. But the sovereign held firm with the humans standing behind, and slowly, painfully, the empire that had spent 90 centuries grinding people down learned to lift them up instead. The High Marshal, I heard, spent the rest of his life in service to the change he'd once tried to prevent. Whatever broke in him in that throne room, it healed into something better. He became one of the fiercest champions of the reforms, and when he died, years later, they say the boy he'd nearly killed came to stand at his passing and forgave him, and the old marshal wept the way the sovereign had wept and died at peace. I don't know if that's true, but I hope it is. It sounds like the kind of true thing humans make happen just by being what they are. And me, I went back to selling spices. What else? But it was different now. Everything was different. The old cloth merchant's question, which of them is really the monster, had been answered for the whole galaxy in that throne room, and the answer changed how everyone looked at everything. Adira Sol comes back to Valjean sometimes, even now, years later. She's old now, genuinely old, gray all through her hair, and every time she comes she visits the lower market, visits my stall, buys dried fruit she doesn't need just for an excuse to talk, the way the old cloth merchant used to. And we sit, the ambassador who saved the galaxy and the spice seller who witnessed it, and we watch the crowds go by in the golden light, and we listen to the bells. Once I asked her why she still comes to a nobody's stall in a lower market when she could be anywhere with anyone, honored on 1,000 worlds. She thought about it for a while, the way she thinks about everything, and then she said, "Because you walked toward the ship when everyone else ran. You wanted to understand instead of being afraid." She smiled, that same tired, kind smile from the plaza all those years ago. The whole galaxy remembers me now. They put up statues, they write it all down, and they get it wrong mostly. They make me into a conqueror, a genius, a legend. But it wasn't any of that. It was just this. I walked toward the thing I didn't understand instead of away from it. That's all I ever did. That's all any of us ever did, my whole species, from the poison world to the throne room. We walked toward the frightening thing. Every time. We refused to run. And you did too. A spice seller with nothing but his own 2 feet. You did the exact thing my whole species is built on the day it mattered most, with no ships and no power and nothing to protect you. So no, you're not a nobody. You never were. You're the bravest thing I found in this whole ancient empire, and I'd rather sit at your stall in the light and eat your dried fruit than stand on any statue they ever build me. The bells are ringing as I finish telling you this. I can hear them, even now, light and free, the way they've rung ever since the day the humans came. People ask me when they hear I was there, they ask me what I learned, what the whole thing meant. The wall, the fire, the throne room, the boy's blood on the golden floor. And I tell them it was never about strength. Everyone thinks it was about strength. The wall that shrugged off the home fleet, the humans who moved faster than our warriors, the power that could have destroyed us and didn't. But that was never the point. The point was the choice. Every single moment the humans held all the power, and every single moment they chose mercy, chose to heal instead of conquer, chose to bleed instead of burn, chose to look at a spice seller and a gutter merchant and see, not gutter, but a person, somebody who mattered, somebody worth saving. That's the thing the conquered never understood in 9,000 years, and the humans understood in the marrow of their bones. That power isn't what you can do. Power is what you choose not to do when you could do anything, and you choose kindness anyway. The humans came to our throne world, and panic spread across the stars, and everyone was so certain it was the end of everything. And it was the end of the rot, the end of the contempt, the end of 9,000 years of grinding people down. And the beginning, the true beginning, at last, of something worth being. I sell spices. My family has for 6 generations, and my children will for a 7th. And every morning I open my stall in the golden light, and I listen to the bells, and I remember the day they stopped, and the wall in the sky, and the woman who didn't kneel. And I think we called them weeds, galactic weeds, grow anywhere in the worst dirt, and you can't kill them fast enough to matter. We were right about every word. We just didn't understand, until they came to our throne, that the weeds were the thing that would finally break through 9,000 years of beautiful golden stone and let the light in.